When you have an autoimmune disorder, no one even knows what you have, and they kind of look at you like you're fine, you're lazy, or something's mental, and it isn't mental.
I'm so excited to have our next guest, Gwen Foster. She is a Hannah Kroger practitioner, certified master NLP practitioner, certified biofeedback technician. She received her Bachelor of Natural Health Studies with highest honors in 2003. Then she earned her Doctor of Natural Medicine from the World Organization of Natural Medicine Practitioners in 2008. She is also the creator of an advanced AI health scanning technology called New Vision. Gwen is the first naturopathic doctor and functional medical practitioner that I spoke with after we finally decided to bring ESS60 to the market. Gwen's mission is to use natural medicine best practices to make the world a healthier place.
So many women that have Hashimoto's have had their gallbladder removed. Hashimoto's can also attack the kidneys and the heart and the brain and the thyroid itself. And so there's actually a necrosis or a destruction of these other body systems that can cause long-term damage. The challenge with Hashimoto's is...
Hi, my name is Chris Burris. I'm a longevity expert and the chief scientist at a lab focused on a longevity molecule. My primary focus is to help people live longer and better lives with science. Make sure to subscribe and share so you and your friends can live longer and better. Well, actually, so you and your friends can live beyond the norms.
Hi, and welcome to the next episode of the Live Beyond the Norms Health and Longevity Podcast. I'm so excited to have our next guest, Gwen Foster, join us today. Gwen is the first naturopathic doctor and functional medical practitioner that I spoke with after we finally decided to bring ESS60 to the market. She was already a big fan of our product and we connected right away. The first video I ever did related to ESS60 was with Gwen. And some of the most popular videos she has on her YouTube channel are the ones where she and I are discussing ESS60. So I'm so happy to return the favor to her now. Gwen has so many talents. She is a Hannah Kroger, if I say that, is that correct? Hannah Kroger practitioner?
That's correct.
Certified master NLP practitioner, certified biofeedback technician. She received her Bachelor of Natural Health Studies with highest honors in 2003. Then she earned her Doctor of Natural Medicine from the World Organization of Natural Medicine Practitioners in 2008. She is also the creator of an advanced AI health scanning technology called New Vision. Gwen's mission from her website is to use natural medicine best practices to make the world a healthier place. Today, I want to dig into her expertise regarding Hashimoto's disease and hormones if we get a chance to get to that. Gwen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Chris.
So I want to dig in deep regarding Hashimoto's disease, but before we do that, I want to go even further back to when you were growing up. Where did little Gwen grow up? Was there any indication that little Gwen was going to eventually help people with their health? Any indication that you were going to become an entrepreneur in the health space?
No, I would have absolutely said no. That wasn't on the game list or the game board. So actually what happened was I was high math. I was going to be a mechanical engineer, and I have an electronics degree before I have my naturopathic degree. And so, but what happened was after a trip to Africa in 1988, I started having a lot of health issues. And I was one of those people that, ended up in the medical system and was literally had doctor appointments a few times a week. Before I got off of Western medicine, and even I didn't even know what natural medicine was. I was raised a normal kid, eating hot dogs and pancakes and Cheerios. It's just like I didn't know anything about health, to be honest. And by the time my life changed, I had been diagnosed with lupus. I had been diagnosed with chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. I had adult onset asthma. I was allergic to like everything under the sun. I had acid reflux. Back then, Claritin was a prescription. So I actually was on 8 prescriptions and more prednisone than would ever be allowed today. Like prednisone is like pretty guarded today, but think about in the 80s, prednisone was dilled out like opiates. It was like, you have pain. Oh, here's some more prednisone. which actually caused me some long-term issues with my liver, the damage from the prednisone. So the way I got into health was actually my own journey. And I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's in, I think I was 32. But I went to Africa when I was 28. So there was a period of time of 4 years between the trip to Africa and then my journey into my own health issues, because unlike some people that get malaria, it wasn't obvious to me. I did everything I was supposed to do to go to Africa. I got the vaccines. I took the malaria medicine. I actually was one of the few people that finished the safari. It was a month-long safari. Most of the people in my group did not finish because of dysentery or stomach issues or one thing or another. And I thought, yay me, I got through, I have an iron stomach. I made it, just to find out years later that actually I did have issues from that trip that was kind of like a person who has Lyme disease, but for 10 years doesn't know they have Lyme disease. They just know there's a lot of things going wrong. So that's actually how I got here. It was by accident. Completely by accident.
So where did you grow up? Obviously, kind of right-brained, going down the path of engineering, and where did the trip to Africa fit in that kind of career path?
So what happened was I grew up, I was born in Austin, spent my summers on our family farm in McDade, Texas, but grew up mostly in Houston, went to school in Houston. And I went to Africa. I got my electronics degree. I was working for Wang Labs, which, was the, pre-PC era. So big frame computers, band printers, tape drives, all that stuff. I worked on all that stuff. And Africa was just a dream of mine. I love animals. I wanted to go there. I wanted to see the animals in Africa. So it was a photographic safari. So it was just my vacation. I didn't go for work or anything. It was just, I had a great job. And at the time, Wang was based out of Boston. I did a lot of trips to Boston for, higher education and, specialty training and stuff like that. But Africa was just a vacation.
Very cool. So one of the things you're talking about, and the one that stands out for me is fibromyalgia, which, as I understand, is kind of a name that doctors tend to give when they don't really know exactly what's going on. And I think some of the other things that you were diagnosed with sit in that category. Is that true? And how to talk about a little bit about that experience? Because you're clearly, probably the first thing you did was try and figure out, okay, what are these and what else can I do about them? How did that look in those early days?
Yeah, that was so frustrating because I was a very healthy person. Like, I had nothing wrong as a kid. I was considered, healthy. And all of a sudden, I couldn't get enough sleep. My body literally hurt all over. I had a hard time getting in and out of bed. I mean, I could get out of bed, but I was sore. I mean, when all your muscles hurt and the doctors can't find something specifically wrong with you, they tend to think you're depressed, which is also frustrating. I should write a book about the lack of empathy for autoimmune disorders, because, when someone has cancer, everybody rallies around you and helps you with your kids and clean the house and helps you with things. And when you have an autoimmune disorder, no one even knows what you have. And they kind of look at you like, you're fine, you're lazy, or you're, something's mental. And it isn't mental, but when your body hurts, and there was actually one point in this journey that I had shingles as well. So when I had lupus, I had shingles and I had fibromyalgia and I had chronic fatigue. I mean, that's a train wreck. And so not only can you not function, but with shingles particularly, which are awful, I remember there was a period of time that I couldn't even have clothing or bed sheets touching my skin. It just felt like fire. And so when the air conditioner kicks on, because you know how hot Houston is, even just that wind from the air conditioning vent, it didn't feel good. And you want to put something on to kind of protect you, because otherwise it'd be too hot. It was this horrible existence. But, the shingles was one thing. They give you drugs for shingles, like your antiviral drugs, is similar to herpes. But that with the adult onset asthma, I mean, it's just like horrible. But going back to your question with fibromyalgia, fibromyalgia is a little more understood now, and there are like rheumatoid factors and things that you can do on blood tests. I think rheumatoid arthritis and fibromyalgia are pretty close, but it's going to tie into our conversation with Hashimoto's, because once I got the Hashimoto's under control, I haven't had fibromyalgia since. So I was lucky that I met someone through my education being an ND. And at that time, it was Dr. Roger Murphy, who specialized in chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, for instance. And, one of his big things he said was, it's your thyroid. You need to do the right test to get your thyroid under control. Later, I learned a lot more from Dr. Karazian, who I think is really an expert at Hashimoto's and autoimmune disorders. So I have been using their protocols along with some things that I've done myself and learned myself. Like, they weren't really big on adaptogens. We'll talk about that in a minute with protocols, but basically, fibromyalgia is misunderstood. And when you have a young woman, number one, who's thin, because I was always thin, no one's thinking it's a thyroid issue. That's the first thing. But secondly, the wrong tests are run, so they don't usually catch it. And the train wreck just continues. And so it just becomes like this bigger and bigger mess. And so, like, a lot of times because of what I went through, when I have that woman, it's usually women, call me that has, 10, 20 or 30 issues, I'm assuming Hashimoto's or autoimmune, because there's almost nothing else that does that. Like, Lyme disease does do it. There's a lot of overlay, but it's different, and there's different ways to test for both.
So if I understood correctly, when you got this diagnosis for Hashimoto's, you were already kind of down a health path. Is that fair to say, or did that kind of kick that health path off?
No, I was already on a health path because I was already in school, and I'd already done work on the malaria, and I had already done a lot of things, changed my diet completely. So by the time I was confirmed Hashimoto's, I was already 15 years into my health journey and getting my health back.
So, okay. So that's what I thought. So we've talked a little bit about Hashimoto's. You said that it can overlap with Lyme disease, and you just described. So actually, I've already got the answer to this question, which is when people start presenting a whole slew of different things, your first kind of thought process is Hashimoto's. Once you understand that it might be Hashimoto's, what is your next step with that?
There's 3 reasons, in my opinion, why people have Hashimoto's. And I don't think Hashimoto's just happens to somebody. I don't think it's caused by something else. It's your body attacking itself, or the autonomic nervous system has become confused, or it's just like any autoimmune disorder is basically the body attacking itself in one way or another. Hashimoto's is unique and misunderstood because most people think Hashimoto's is a thyroid disorder. Hashimoto's is an autoimmune disorder that also affects the thyroid. And that's where I think people get messed up with Hashimoto's, because during the process of Hashimoto's, or in the early stages of Hashimoto's, like in young girls, like teenage girls, sometimes the very first symptom of Hashimoto's and the only symptom is constipation. Like, constipation can be an early sign of Hashimoto's, or, hair loss, or anxiety or depression, or weight gain, unexplained, like they're not eating enough to gain weight, but maybe their lab tests for normal thyroid markers come back normal. So in the very beginning, and fatigue is almost always in there. And body aches and muscular aches. And I think there was a study done once that said 86% of people that have fibromyalgia actually have some thyroid imbalance, whether it's just low thyroid or Hashimoto's or thyroiditis, or, any of those kind of things that to me are very similar. So when you're talking about just aches and pains, especially in young women, and fatigue that isn't explained by anemia or some other obvious things, I would probably go to thyroid and possibly adrenals first. But anyway, as it progresses, the challenge with Hashimoto's is that's when it is not a thyroid disorder. And that's when I really want to emphasize anyone watching this, is that when you get past just the early stage of the thyroid is doing something weird. And this is like the person who thinks they have low thyroid, because they're losing their hair, they're fatigued, they got muscle aches and pains, maybe depression, maybe constipation. They go to the doctor runs TSH and T4, which is totally pointless. And they are told their thyroid's fine. And then they waste 10 or 20 years of their life until they get the right test done. Well, during that period of time, a number of other things happen with Hashimoto's. Hashimoto's, number one, attacks the gallbladder. So many women that have Hashimoto's have had their gallbladder removed. Hashimoto's can also attack the kidneys and the heart and the brain and the thyroid itself. And so there's actually a necrosis or a destruction of these other body systems that can cause long-term damage. There was also another study that said there's a large percentage, I've heard between 40% or higher of people with Alzheimer's and dementia are either undiagnosed or misdiagnosed Hashimoto's people. Well, that makes sense to me because when your body's in self-attack mode, then the brain is part of the body, it's affected. And then also there's multiple autoimmune conditions at one time. So a lot of times people with Hashimoto's end up with type 2 diabetes, which is also an autoimmune condition. They'll have increased allergies. They're the people that are allergic to everything, especially gluten, but possibly anything. So maybe they can only eat 10 things or they can only eat 20 things. That's a definite autoimmune person. Like no normal person, not even a Lyme person has, such a restricted diet is potentially a person with Hashimoto. So that's how it's affecting the gut. So what I just want to make really clear is that Hashimoto's can affect almost every body system, the muscular system, the immune system, the heart, the kidneys, just everything. And that's why untreated or undiagnosed, the person is the train wreck. The person sends me an email that has literally every body system has a problem. And a lot of times, whether it's in natural medicine or in functional medicine or even in Western medicine, everybody wants to approach each system separately instead of trying to get to the underlying cause of the Hashimoto's. And so the three causes, I'll just share this, is estrogen dominance, big factor with Hashimoto's, and what I think is the primary underlying cause. And this can be from birth control pills, genetics, estrogen in our environment, creams, lotions, makeup, sunscreens, all that stuff. The second cause is chronic infection that's left untreated. And this might be viral, which we're seeing a big uptick in Hashimoto's in the last 3 years because of long COVID. Parasites, candida, mold, bacteria, low level UTIs and mouth bacteria, all that can cause Hashimoto's. And then the third reason is food allergies that the person just either can't identify or just continues to ignore. Like someone's told them they can't do grains, but they keep doing grains. So that's going to cause this kind of constant inflammation in the body and cause these little cytokine storms in the thyroid, which are like these little fire explosions. And that can sometimes even be misdiagnosed as Graves' disease in early stage, because when you're in this like thyroiditis mode or this flare up because of the cytokine storms from the gut, if you happen to get your lab test in that moment, you might appear to be Graves or hyperthyroid. But most Graves' disease is actually either inflamed Hashimoto's or early stage Hashimoto's, which is kind of interesting too, because I've met quite a number of women that have had nuclear medicine or had their thyroid removed, I think unnecessarily, because they were misdiagnosed as an early stage Hashimoto's case.
And my understanding is Graves is one way, and then Hashimoto's is another, meaning is an overproductive thyroid versus an underproductive, or do I have that backwards?
No, it's kind of correct. The Graves is overactive, so that's when TSH is considered low, and the telltale sign of Graves is like bulging eyes. People that have like an eye bulging, that would be like Graves' disease. Hashimoto's can be hyper or hypo, and I'll show you some labs that kind of show both. And then hypothyroid is just low thyroid, but not necessarily Hashimoto. Sometimes people might have low thyroid for other reasons that isn't autoimmune. So there is such a thing as just having a low thyroid without being autoimmune thyroid.
So we have a kind of a general idea. What does your practice look like demographically? Adults, children, a lot of Hashimoto's? Is it everything you just described? What is the kind of the broad demographics look like for your practice?
Probably 80% of my clients are women over 50. I see clients of all ages, including children and pets, from the natural angle. I'd say that out of all my clients, at least half have an autoimmune disorder, not always just Hashimoto's, but maybe lupus or something else. And, but I don't have ever any simple cases. Like the people that seek me out are the ones that have some chronic or complex issue that they feel like are not getting answers for, or they're looking for an underlying cause and not just another medication. I would say that's 99% of my clients. Like no one calls me because they just have gout, which that's pretty easy to resolve. They're not just a single symptom or diagnosis kind of client. That's not what I deal with.
And how do they typically find you? Like, do you have a kind of a network of other practitioners who might send these more challenging cases your direction?
Yes, usually it's by referral. I don't advertise at all. So it is usually by referral. Someone else, saw me for something like hormone help, and then they refer someone else. I do have a YouTube and a Rumble channel, but I really don't get that many appointments from that. I think it's more from personal referral.
Okay, that makes sense. You mentioned that the first thing that if there's a perception of a thyroid challenge, they'll get a T3H. Did I jot that down? And a T4 or TSH and a T4, and you're like, those are useless. Talk a little bit about why that's your perspective that those are not useful, and then what would you lean on more?
TSH, can I share my screen and show that?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so this is just multiple examples of different blood tests. Let's start with this one. Okay, this is a 56-year-old woman. Now, what most doctors and primary care physicians would do, and only if there were some symptoms to mandate this, they would run the TSH and the T4. So with this particular person, those are quite normal. So green on this particular report means normal, and the optimal range is right there to the right, and which is functional medicine, and then the clinical or sick range is to the right of that. So regardless, her TSH and T4 are very normal. But one thing you can see is a little bit further down, you can see those thyroid peroxidase or TPO antibodies are elevated at 33.20. This is a Hashimoto's case, and this person has a totally normal TSH and T4. So just to explain how the thyroid actually works is the TSH is pointless in thyroid testing because it's the signal that the pituitary sends to the thyroid to tell it how much thyroid stimulating hormone to produce. So that's a pituitary signal to begin with. Then the TSH produces the total T4, which gets converted to free T4, which gets converted to free T3. And free T3 is what's actually uptaken by the thyroid gland. So there's a few processes in there that also require nutrition, like tyrosine and selenium and zinc. And there's also some liver involvement, and it's kind of also well known that people with Hashimoto's a lot of times have MTHFR or methylation issues. So in this particular case, if this woman, which she did, she went to the doctor and they told her thyroid's perfectly fine, but it's not perfectly fine because her TPO antibodies are elevated. So this is why you can't just go get a TSH and T4, and some doctors just run TSH. So you would never find this TPO antibodies. This lady was also a person that was kind of, I'm not going to say she was a train wreck, but she had a lot of symptoms and stuff that I just knew talking to her that she was a Hashimoto's candidate. So that's like one example.
Just to clarify, yeah, the antibodies are an indication of that kind of autoimmune disease, right? Of the body attacking the actual thyroid. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. This is the antibodies, whether it's TPO antibodies or antithyroid globulin antibodies, they're both used to test for Hashimoto's. This is another example that I really wanted to share because this lady was diagnosed with Graves' disease. but she actually has Hashimoto's. So you see her, I put her labs from 2021 next to her labs in 2024. So in 2021, her TSH has that hot pink and alarm symbol because it's super hyperactive, because the lower your TSH is the higher it's hyperactive, and 0 is terrible. But you also see that her thyroid globulin antibodies were 345. And the thumbs up means compared to 2024, which is just showing you, the results of working together. So TSH elevated, she was diagnosed Graves. That's normal. Her free T3 was also elevated, which is a sign of why they would say Graves, because that means her free T3 was too high. This is unmedicated. Thyroid globulin antibodies 345, which is terrible. The number should be under a 1. This is a very inflamed, very active Hashimoto's case. Now, by the time we got through the root causes between the hormones, infection, and diet, her antibodies, her thyroid globulin antibodies went down to 1. What we don't know is what her TPO antibodies were in 2021, because that wasn't tested, but they were still elevated in 2024. But now she's went from hyper, meaning 0 TSH, to 6.93. TSH is the one that's always weird. It's always a reverse of what people think. Low TSH is hyper, high TSH is hypo. But to me, this is still an improvement, because she went from this 345 thyroid globulin to 1. She went slightly hypo, but this is kind of a normal situation with Hashimoto's, because you're a moving target. You're a moving target based on hormones and infection and diet. So I could run 10 blood tests on somebody, and this is also why it's confusing. You could run 10 blood tests on somebody every 6 months and get completely different information every time you do them, because what if the woman got on birth control? What if the woman is going through perimenopause? What if they ate pizza the night before they did the blood draw? You see, there's a whole lot of things that are moving targets, and that's why you can't depend on a single blood test to determine what's going on with Hashimoto's. You're still overall looking for improvement, but the blood tests also tell me, like, if my client's being compliant, because if they're doing everything they should be doing, their numbers and inflammation markers, which are what the antibodies are to me as inflammatory markers, should be going down. They shouldn't be going up. In this case, they went down quite a bit on the thyroid globulin, and I'm pretty sure the TPO antibodies would have been higher than 54. We just don't have that number because, like I said, it wasn't tested.
So
Does that
as we
make
look
sense
at
about
this,
the Graves, like looking at it from this perspective?
yes, yeah. So because it was, the TSH was 0, that looks more like hyper, right? And so then they would have said, hey, this is potentially Graves. You've got the T4 free at 1.27. That's in range. And then the T3 at 4.6, which is elevated, both from a standard and an optimal range. And again, that would kind of, she got a diagnosis of Graves. And I'm assuming if she was diagnosed with Graves and not with Hashimoto's, that the protocol for solution or resolution was not what it should be.
Right, exactly. The Graves diagnosis sometimes leads to nuclear medicine to radiate and kill the thyroid, or sometimes not as much anymore, but the standard protocol used to be also surgical removal.
And you said that TSH is actually a pituitary signaling molecule. Is that right? It's produced by the pituitary gland?
Yeah, it's a hormone that is a signal from the pituitary. So the pituitary is sending the TSH signal. That's why it's kind of silly to me that it's the main unit of measurement from Western medicine.
Yeah, I don't know, like knowing little to nothing about the particular kind of interactions, it would almost seem like we should be dealing with the pituitary, not with the thyroid. If the signaling molecule from the pituitary is elevated or whatever, but obviously there's an interaction back and forth between the pituitary and the thyroid, and the pituitary is just saying, hey, produce more, and maybe the thyroid isn't or it is producing too much, and then they go after the thyroid. That seems, I don't know. That's interesting. I guess that's
well, if I was an insurance company or a doctor and I was going to say, let's run two things instead of TSH and T4, I would run free T3 and TPO antibodies, because free T3 is what the body has actually done with that signal and all the conversions. So if you have low T3, you need support. Well, this is the other interesting thing having to do with like the Western approach to Hashimoto's. The Western approach to Hashimoto's is Thyroid. And that's only if you have a high TSH and a low T4. But see, they don't run all these other things. So what happens is you get a Thyroid prescription. You don't downregulate the autoimmune at all because that's not addressed whatsoever. You don't change your diet. You don't look for infection. You don't try to balance hormones. So basically the TPO antibodies is totally ignored, like it doesn't exist. And what they're also missing, because they don't test for it, is they're not getting the T3. So they're assuming that a healthy person will take Synthroid, which is just T4. They'll convert it to T3 and uptake it appropriately. But that's not the case in most Hashimoto's people. And that's not even the case in most people. A lot of people have fatty liver, congested liver, high ALT, high AST, and reasons why they don't make all these conversions. So to assume that levothyroxine or Synthroid is the only thing you need when they're not even measuring free T3 is kind of ridiculous. But if the TPO antibodies is in the way and then they don't talk about these other things, what the person is going to live with is this, lifelong chronic constipation, brain fog, hair loss. When I was younger, my hair was so thin that I was doing the creative comb over. You could see my scalp, and I'd part on the side and do this thing and use some hairspray. But, of course, they're like, yeah, some people just have hair loss. No, it's because I had Hashimoto's that was not addressed correctly. So, but Alzheimer's, dementia, these more serious issues, the gallbladder being removed, to me, that's a serious issue. It's not an optional organ. I don't think God gave us optional body parts, but, I like my gallbladder. I want to keep it. But if you don't know, you don't know. So you just keep taking your levothyroxine and feeling like crap and not getting any real help.
Yeah, it sounds really frustrating. I think maybe you need to make a T-shirt that says, I like my gallbladder, I want to keep it.
Well, exactly. I would like to keep it. I want to show this example too, because this is a really crazy example. This is a 20-year-old female, totally normal TSH and T4, again, the one the doctors test. Her free T4 was slightly elevated, but look at her total T3. It's like 60 points under normal.
Wow.
I mean, that's craziness right there. There's no conversion there. There was no conversion from T4 to T3. And on this particular 20-year-old, they didn't check for Hashimoto's. This right now screams to me Hashimoto's. Either that or there's a major liver issue. Like, you can't take a normal or elevated free T4 and get to a T3 that's a fourth of what it should be at a minimum. I mean, this to me would be one of those people that I'd say you got to test for Hashimoto's, because there's like not too many things, that actually do that. I wanted to show one last thing on this before we get to more questions, just on examples. Yeah. I wanted to show the progression of a person that started with me as an 18-year-old female college student. She had normal TSH and free T4. But on her subsequent labs, I said, well, we need to check for Hashimoto's, because she also is a type 1 diabetic. And so her TPO antibodies came back at 379. They had not ever been checked by a doctor. And being a type 1 diabetic, I was like, kind of suspicious that they wouldn't check that. So it came back as 379. But I just wanted to show you how crazy people's labs look like sequentially. So May 2021, you can see the numbers. And then, so it kind of took the last 4 years. So August 2022, her TSH goes low, which means hyper, slightly hyper. Her T3 is in the tank, right? The T3 is 0.96 compared to 90. her TPO antibodies went down actually from 379 to 91 by trying to make changes with, hormones and things like that. But this is like what you see with Hashimoto's. You see numbers that are just all over the place. And this is a person that comes into me and they said, well, I'm not sure what's going on with my thyroid because one time I go to the doctor, they said it's high. Next time I go, they say it's low. The next time I don't even know what's going on anymore, but they won't give me anything because they don't know really what's going on. That, like, any kind of person who has that story should be checking Hashimoto's. Because there's almost nothing else that acts like that. Then, I don't know what happened there with 2023. Oh, I know what happened. This is 2023. The next one down, it just moved in the wrong spot. And you see, it looks great. TSH great. Free T3 right on the money. Those TP antibodies still elevated though. So if you look at that compared to 2022, the one right before it, which looks like a hot mess.
Yeah.
And that's probably, college student eating stuff that she wasn't doing at home, stuff like that. Her hormones going through some things, birth control pills. Anyway, this is a pretty good Hashimoto's result on the one that's all green. That means like everything's lining up. And then this was her last test. Everything looking still pretty good. Her free T3 just slightly low. Her TP antibodies lowest it's been in 4 years. Now, if I just scroll up so you can see the numbers, 379, 91, 125, and 58. This is the first time in 2024 that she's been out of what I'd call the alert phase of TPO antibodies, meaning she was very inflamed. But this was also a period of time in 2024 she was very strict on the diet, no gluten, no grains. She did ALCAT testing to make sure what she should not eat. She was very compliant. Before that, she'd been very depressed. She was flunking school because her brain wasn't working. She was sleeping a lot, tired a lot. Like, you can hear what people tell you and see the labs. And when I can get the full panel, which now I've been working with her for almost 4 years, you can see like what's happening, not only the compliance from the client, but if what I'm doing or suggesting is working. If you don't have these full blood panels on thyroid, you're just shooting in the dark. You're like, I don't know what's happening.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing story that you're telling here, and then great to see the progress.
Hey, super quick break from the podcast. Hopefully you're loving it. This is a way you can support the podcast and take advantage of a great offer. We're offering 50% off of one of our MCT bottles. MCT is an amazing oil. Add the ESS60 molecule to it. It's even more amazing. All you got to do is leave a review on iTunes, send us a notification that you've left that review. We'll get you a coupon code that'll get you 50% off of our MCT oil and free shipping. Back to the podcast.
So what are the main things that you're changing for her? Like, there's you've got sleep, movement, nutrition. Like, what are the maybe mindset and stress management? And then you throw in potentially, birth control. So where does that, like, what were you walking her through to get to this better result?
Well, one thing was birth control and diet. So birth control will bring in the estrogen dominance. And it's hard to convince young people. I mean, it's a hard battle, right? Birth control is birth control, and there's a reason for it. But birth control almost always is going to affect the thyroid because of the estrogen dominance, because the way birth control works is it keeps you from getting pregnant by putting you in an estrogen dominant state. But that's why also the increase in, endometriosis and cysts and fibroids and all this stuff. I think it's interesting that doctors will prescribe birth control for 30 or 40 years for someone, but when someone hits menopause, they're dangerous. They cause cancer. It's like, okay, well, it was okay for 30 years for birth control, but it's not okay when you want to go postal because you're menopausal. So I always think there's some other thing, something's going on there. Why they would, they'll prescribe birth control to a 12-year-old for acne. But not want to give the right estrogen or hormone support to a menopausal woman who is really pulling her hair out of her head. Anyway,
as
that's
it's
aside.
falling out. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There's some stuff going on there. So, but to me, you got to get those food restrictions. You got to be on a strict diet. I mean, in a Hashimoto's person, there's 2 hard fast rules: no grains and no iodine. Now, iodine is a very controversial subject, and I just kind of debated this with someone. So I just want to tell you what happened with me with iodine, but also want to show you an example. So Dr. Karazian is the one that told me no iodine. You cannot have iodine, none, no seaweed, no supplements with iodine. Iodine is the enemy to Hashimoto's. Well, most people that, just have like a, normal nutrition background, everyone's heard iodine's essential for thyroid health. Like, I know that. Everybody's heard that.
I've heard that. Yes.
Everybody's heard that. Everybody thinks that that's what you're missing if you have a thyroid issue. So anyway, Dr. Karazian said it. I was following his other protocols. They were working for me. And I don't know if you know Dr. Jerry Tennant, but he's a pretty famous ophthalmologist in Dallas that went on a nature slant of his own because he was dying and natural medicine cured him. And now he's a big proponent. Anyway, I know Jerry personally, and we had a big debate about iodine, and he convinced me to get on it. And he said, the natural C plasma, iodine, you have to have it. It's essential. And this was, I remember specifically in 2008. And I took the seed mineral form, not like a supplement of iodine, but seed mineral, a form of iodine. And in 2 months, I gained 18 pounds. I was puffy all over. I felt terrible. I was having globs of hair fall out of my head. And during that period of time, I had a driver's license picture taken and my face looked like a clown. I mean, I looked like moon face, mixed edema. And I was unrecognizable because my face is not round like that. And I called him and I said, look, this is what's happening with iodine. And he says what almost every other doctor says, iodine's essential. You can't be allergic to it. It's impossible. And I'm like, I didn't say I was allergic to it. I'm just telling you that I am miserable. And I will also add that it took me 2 years. It took me 2 months to gain 18 pounds. It took me 2 years to lose those 18 pounds.
Wow.
I went from a size 8 to a size 12 in 2 months. So, okay, fast forward to this. This is just this year. This is one of my clients this year, 79-year-old woman who has Hashimoto's. So this is her labs. And I'm going to show you what happened. So she had TPO antibodies of 9.7. Her TSH is slightly high, but it was getting better. So it went from 3.41 to 2.83. She was one of the people that came to me and she had all the symptoms. I knew she had Hashimoto, so I did the blood work, but previously she had not been tested for it. Her thyroid globulin antibodies high, her TPO antibodies high. And she was dizzy. She had some stuff going on that seemed cardiovascular. She added iodine into the routine, even though that's a hard, fast rule with Hashimoto's. And so these labs I'm showing you right now are May and August. So that's what happened. Just slight improvement with TSH in those few months. She started taking iodine in December and everything tanked. So this is after taking iodine for about 1 month. So I'll just try to put it where you can see both on the screen. Her TSH went from 2.83 to 6.26, so it went more hypo. Her T3 went into the danger level. It was already really low at 1.15. It went to 0.84. Her TPO antibodies went from 9 to 41, and her thyroid globulin antibodies stayed about the same at 2.4. So I know that someone is going to watch this and want to debate me on the subject of iodine.
Yes.
And I wanted to show this because I have heard so many people say, you have to have iodine, you have to take iodine. And I am just going to say that if you have Hashimoto's, you should probably listen to me and not take iodine, because if something is going to make you miserable, so that means no seaweed products, including like sushi, no iodized salt, and no supplements with iodine. And the other big avoid for Hashimoto's is grains, no gluten. So that means no beer, no wine coolers, no malted beverages, no rye, wheat, spelt. Rice is okay, potatoes okay as far as starch, but not anything that would have gluten in it. And those are hard, fast rules for Hashimoto's. Like never, it's not like you can't have it for a month. You just have to get it in your head. Now, remember when I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's, the only thing on the market back then was rice cakes. Those are pretty awful.
Yeah.
If you go today to the store, to HEB or anywhere, you can get gluten-free something. You can get it everywhere. Every grocery store, every restaurant has gluten-free options. But when I was told gluten-free, I thought it was like a death sentence. I thought it's not a big deal anymore.
Yeah. So we were up in New Jersey, and my niece's boyfriend has celiac. So, it's gluten's an absolute no. One of the things I've learned in kind of being around him is I don't think it is intuitively obvious that soy sauce is a wheat product. I certainly never knew that. I would be impressed what percentage of people know. And you can get a gluten-free soy sauce. We just ate at a restaurant that served it, and it was cold. I assume that there's some aspect of gluten-free soy sauce that actually will go bad. And so they do actually refrigerate it, or maybe they just don't serve it very often. So it was refrigerated. But yeah, there are so many gluten-free options now. And yeah, I can imagine it was like a death sentence. It does bring me back, because in my mind, is this a situation where, and I kind of have my own answer, because there are some situations where people can have these food sensitivities, they back off of them, and then they can have them from time to time, once a week or whatever. I also have heard, and I don't remember who said this, but there was no such thing as a mostly gluten-free diet. It is either gluten-free or it is not gluten-free. So it is the case. Like if this is where you're at, then you're giving up gluten and potentially some grains and other things in perpetuity.
Yes. And the way I would explain that is food reactions can last 3 days. So if someone has gluten twice a week, then you're staying in an inflamed state. Yeah. Now, I'm not going to say that if I went to a wedding and had a piece of wedding cake and that's going to have gluten in it, that I might take a bite. I'm not going to have that in my house. I'm not going to seek that out. But, there's so many restaurants and things, like Thai food has rice noodles. Chinese food has rice. Most restaurants have sides that don't have gluten. I just mostly stay away from battered and bread type things, but I've been doing it so long that I don't really crave them. I mean, yeah, who doesn't love a great piece of pizza? But It's not something to me I feel worth it. And I really think that, most of the clients that by the time they find me, they're so miserable that they are willing to do anything. Does that mean they never have gluten? Yeah, probably not. And like you said, there's hidden gluten. It's in soy sauce. It's in tamari is the one that doesn't have gluten, but it is in things you would never imagine, because you would think, well, why would that be in there? But it's more common than people think. And of course, battered things, not just the bread things, but a lot of people forget about the malted beverages, the scotches and the whiskeys and the gin, vodka, if it's potato is okay, or rice vodka. But if it's, it's all the alcohols that have, made from grains, which are most of them, except let's say tequila, some vodkas, and wine. The rest of them, I would say, fall into the gluten category. So some people think it's more about bread, and they're not thinking about even alcoholic beverages.
And that probably it represents a lot of kind of what you need to do. You probably have some people who are kind of in an inflamed Hashimoto's state and believe that they're gluten-free, and then you start working with them and you're like, well, are you eating this and that? And they're like, oh, I am. I didn't realize it had had the potential to have gluten in it. Is that something that crops up from time to time?
Oh, of course. And I can see that on the labs. If I see, I had a man recently that he was Hashimoto's, and he's telling me that he's compliant, and his follow-up labs were a disaster. And I was like, there's no way you're being compliant. And he kind of started laughing, and he said, well, maybe I shouldn't have done this. But he went to a tailgate party on a Sunday and had his labs taken on a Monday morning. and he looked worse than the first time I did his labs. And I was like, okay, yeah, that wasn't smart, but how often are you doing tailgate parties? Like, that's, I mean, it has to be the exception and not the norm. And that might be the person who's just not taking it seriously because they don't really understand. But to me, it's like, you know, the way I talk about it with Hashimoto's people is maybe try to scare them a little bit, because it's just like the diabetic who doesn't take it seriously. Like, if someone tells me that they're going to amputate my leg, I'm going to comply, right? I'm not going to lose a limb. Well, the way I scare people with Hashimoto's is, do you want to be in the Alzheimer's ward of the nursing home? Is that your goal? Because that's what's happening to your brain when you eat gluten. So do you want to keep doing that? Like, sometimes you have to get people's attention, because it's not just a bad idea. It's understanding the like necrosis of the tissue in the body that's happening when it's under fire. And no one really heard, I don't know that very many people ever heard of the term cytokine storm until COVID came out. But that is what's happening. Like, every time you eat gluten, there's a cytokine storm in the thyroid that's it's like a fire, and it's causing havoc all over the body. And so if you want to keep doing that, then there goes the gallbladder, there goes the brain, you know, kidney damage, more likely to have dialysis. But so it's not really optional, but people have to get to that point that they understand that it's not like a game. It's like, hey, there's a lot of really great foods out there. I eat really well. I don't feel like I'm missing anything because I don't have gluten.
Yeah. So one thing that I was thinking, right? So you could identify in his I'm assuming TPO went up after this, tailgating adventure. There's another test called a wheat zoomer. I don't know how familiar you are with that. Is that something that you've ever used to kind of keep an eye on compliance, or you just see it so readily in the TPO antibodies that you don't need any sort of other indication?
I see it in the TPO antibodies. I don't do that particular test you just said, but there's other tests that'll test for gluten sensitivity or gliadin, and there's other testing I can do to show them this is bad, but it's not directly saying that has to do with Hashimoto's. It's just like, hey, you have a strong reaction, so there's different tests through urine, saliva, blood test that can show the level of reactivity to gluten and gliadin and wheat and grains. If someone wants to have that test done, it's just, costs money, but it would maybe give them a little bit more confirmation. And then just like with this example on screen about iodine, people can do whatever they want. And I would say this with any diet, like if someone's going to do keto or carnivore or paleo, it's always a good idea to do labs first, do whatever you're going to do, and then do labs 6 months later. Because sometimes people feel like they have a strong opinion about whatever, being vegetarian or paleo or keto, but sometimes it's not working for them, because maybe they have a weakness in their liver or gallbladder and they can't digest all that fat, so just because someone wrote a book about it or someone has a strong opinion about a diet doesn't mean that it's right for every individual. So I would say that is true about, people with Hashimoto's, is if you do enough labs on somebody and they know what they've been doing as far as diet and lifestyle, labs don't lie. That's what I like about labs. They don't lie, and they're in real time of that person's reactivity. So I think labs are great because they can see for themselves that tailgate party was a bad idea, or that, twice a week gluten, they're not getting better. So then I challenge them, do it strictly for 3 months, then let's get another blood test and I'll show you, I can prove it in labs. So that's why I do love labs is they can see where it's failing them, but they can also see what's helping them get better.
I like the example you gave of Alzheimer's, because sometimes you need to rattle cage and you couldn't, that is literally the most terrifying disease. And I'm not saying like that's not my perspective, like on polls, on surveys, that is the thing people are most afraid of. And some of what you're talking about, I had the opportunity to interview Dr. Gundry, and he still sees patients 6 days a week, which is amazing. And he talks about every single person who comes into his office has antibodies to wheat, right? Whether it's gluten, whether it's any other component of the wheat, I would imagine that he ends up with similar things. And then one other story that he told that has kind of the tailgate party reference. He informed one of his clients that they had to give up eggs, and the client was like, I can't give up eggs. I have an omelet literally every day for breakfast. And Dr. Gunnar was like, well, I can't make you give up eggs. Like, you know, if you don't want to feel like this, you need to stop eating that. And that's up to you. And so I know you end up in that situation kind of regularly. Was there anything else? One other thing I think as I was doing research, a concern with Hashimoto's is vitamin D. And that's just seems to be a concern across the board. Like every kind of expert that you're hearing, you know, we're not getting enough sunshine. Where does vitamin D sit in that? And then we can get to our wrap-up questions.
Okay, so vitamin D, that's a great question. So vitamin D is almost always low and sometimes dangerously low with Hashimoto's because of that liver gallbladder thing. Mm-hmm. So people with Hashimoto's already have a weakness in the gallbladder. And the gallbladder is what secretes bile into the stomach to break down fats. Well, vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, whether you get it in a supplement or from the sun. And by the way, DHA is important for vitamin D, conversion and absorption. So if you're low in DHA, which is from the good fatty fish, it's hard to have adequate levels of vitamin D also. But they're both fat, right? So vitamin D is the only vitamin that's not fat soluble is B vitamins. They're water soluble. So Hashimoto's people tend to have more of a vitamin deficiency than any other type of person. So that's A, E, C, K, D, not B's. And so if you were to get a blood work on any of the fat soluble vitamins, they're probably going to be low, but the vitamin D is almost always low and they have to take high doses. So like 5,000 to 10,000 IUs. I personally recommend sunlight. This was, kind of going against what, everybody says about the sun, but this was taught in, the 19th century and all the nature cure centers. Nude sunbathing was one of the top 4 ways to get healthy. We get a different type of vitamin D from the sun versus a supplement, which is super important. And it's essential with Hashimoto's people, but vitamin D by itself has to do with every single body part, cardiovascular, brain, skin, musculoskeletal, nervous system, gut, immune, cancer prevention. It has to do with like everything. So at least 5,000 IUs if someone's going to take it, but I recommend they get out in the sun, with a bathing suit top on if they don't feel comfortable nude. I know it's hard to do in the winter, but that's the best way to get vitamin D. And one other thing I'll say about vitamin D that I'd heard when I was in Brazil that I still believe is true is there was a doctor in Brazil that had made a comment about Americans and sunglasses. And he said, Americans need to stop wearing sunglasses. And I thought it was an odd comment. And he said, it's because you need the sun in your eyes to prevent metabolic disorders and also diabetes. And I always thought, well, that's kind of interesting. And that's just kind of come full circle recently. I heard someone else talking about metabolic processes because of lack of sunlight, because, we're kind of brainwashed about sunscreen and cover yourself up and wear a hat. All those things go completely against what natural medicine said in the 19th century. So I think that some of the old things are coming back around, and I'm glad they are, because I think vitamin D is essential. The other nutrients for the Hashimoto's person is tyrosine, selenium, and zinc. Zinc, hugely important. The only foods that most Americans don't eat that have high levels of zinc are paprika, sunflower seeds, and oysters. Most people don't eat those regularly. So zinc almost always has to be supplemented. Most of your kind of thyroid type supplements have that in there. I would just say, just remember with Hashimoto's, you don't take a thyroid supplement that has iodine. And they do tend to put iodine in a lot of thyroid supplements. So you just have to check for that.
Interesting. Yeah, I actually put paprika in almost all of my meals. I'm eating a lot of protein these days, and it's tends to be a lean turkey or kind of an ancestral blend of beef that includes some organ meats, and paprika is something that I'm adding, that and turmeric to just every meal I have those. Is there anything else that we maybe didn't touch on that you'd want to kind of present before we switch over to our wrap-up questions?
No, I would just say that the only thing I will add is that whether someone goes through me or doesn't, there are a number of labs, like I think people should get out of the mindset that, about insurance and going to their doctor to run these tests, because a lot of doctors just will not run them. And I think that if someone is really interested in this information, you can go to places like Ulta Labs or like Longevity Magazine and some of these different places. Any Lab Test Now is a natural franchise where you can literally walk in without a doctor requisition and get a comprehensive thyroid panel done for about $100 to $200. Now, if they were to bill this through insurance, they would bill you at about $1,000 or $1,600, which is a racket. But to try to convince your doctor to do this panel, this full panel that is like up here or on the other screen I showed you. So TSH, total and free T3, total and free T4, TPO antibodies, antithyroid globulin. It's about $150, like through a Quest kind of place, but without a doctor order. Don't wait on your doctor to do it. Like, go get the lab test yourself. You don't need a doctor prescription anymore. A lot of people still think my doctor has to do it, or they're just demanding that insurance must pay for it.
Yeah.
Don't do that, because if you do, you could waste 10 more years of your life knowing or not knowing what you have going on with your thyroid. I would rather spend $150 and know without, all that process. Now, if someone wants to contact me and I'll order it for them, that's fine too. But and it's a little bit cheaper, but I'm just saying you can do it yourself. If you're watching this, you can go into a walk-in lab, you just tell them what you want and you pay for it. And I'm just saying that's what I would do versus arguing with doctors who are going to say, well, insurance isn't going to pay for it. Okay, whatever. So it's cheaper to go do it on your own.
Well, I'm just going to recommend they contact you, and we'll get your contact details here shortly. All right, time for our wrap-up questions. So the first question is, this is a longevity and health podcast. Do you have a target age that you want to live to?
Oh, mine's 105.
105. And how long do you think humans can live?
I think they can live over 100. I would add a little caveat to that none of us want to live to 100 plus just to be feeble, right? We want to be vital, and also thanks to you and what I know about ESS 60. I mean, that's one of my, primary things I do besides all the, just good health habits. But I don't want to be 105 if I'm in a wheelchair in a nursing home. I want to be a viable living person at 105, or at least to 100.
I like that. You're one of the few whose target equals what they kind of believe humans can live to. A lot of people don't think that way because we haven't separated, and I think this is a mindset that's changing. We haven't separated from living older from living in an infirm state, and that's actually something that I think we're changing. What are 2 to 3 protocols, habits, mindsets, let's call them shortcuts, because everybody likes shortcuts, to longevity and a long health span that you would share?
I guess my favorites would be the basics, hydration, whole foods, ESS 60, and good sleep and rest. And I don't think there's a cheat, right? Like, a lot of people have protocols, but you can't cheat. It's like trying to cheat weight loss. You can do a semaglutide, but that's not realistic long term. So I think it's the basics. I think you sleep longer if you get good sleep. If you eat well, if you get in the sun, just the things we've already been talking about. I don't have this like big expensive protocol that I do. It's just normal, I think, healthy living. I don't own a microwave. I don't eat processed foods. I don't have packaged foods. It's meat and vegetables is mostly what I eat. So, I mean, a cup of coffee is in there too, but I think that's the trick. I think it's not magic.
Yeah, there's no magic silver bullet. What are possibly 1 or 2 things people get absolutely wrong regarding longevity and a long health span?
I think what they get wrong is what I said about the sun. I think we're brainwashed to avoid it and at all costs. And I think for vitality, I I don't know who doesn't feel better after a day in the sun at the beach or on a boat or on a, beach vacation, but the rest of the time we avoid it. That 1 week a year we're, in Mexico or in the Caribbean, we feel amazing. And the rest of the year we're going to like shelter and hide and lather on the sunscreen and be completely covered up. That doesn't make sense to me. I think that that's where we have it completely wrong. And I think that the scare of skin cancer has outweighed any common sense about the sun. The sun draws out toxins. I think if there's cancer related to the sun, it's because you already had cancer and it drew it to the surface. The sun has to do with the vitamin D, which is essential for every body function. The sun is the energy. It's the energy source. It's just our vitality. So I think that's where we have it wrong. I think people should go out in the sun and enjoy it and not wear sunglasses either. Yeah. I mean, I'm not talking about laying in the sun and looking at it directly without sunglasses. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about walking, gardening, playing outside. I think those are important to do without protection.
And would you also add waiting for doctors' prescriptions and insurance approval for tests? That might be something that people get absolutely wrong about a long health span.
I think that mentality has to completely change. I really am, really hopeful about RFK Jr. I'm really excited about that possibility because I really think there needs to be major reform. And I think if people are depending on their doctor to run the right tests without educating themselves, without doing things like watching people on your podcast and people you're interviewing and learning for themselves, like, why are we putting our health and our body in the trust of someone who went to medical school to learn how to prescribe medicines? I saw a funny meme the other day and it was about, curing versus dealing. And I think that that's true. Like if we really want to cure, we have to get to the underlying cause and make change. Otherwise, we're just dealt a prescription that we're expected to take the rest of our life. There's no prescription, I think, that is healing anything. It might make labs temporarily look better, like in some cases like diabetes, but it's not healing anything. So I think that we need to take a totally different approach, which sometimes means paying out of your pocket. But look how many, and sometimes this is a funny thing, Chris, and I know you know this, but sometimes people say, yeah, I can't afford, let's say they can't afford ESS 60, as a daily thing just for anti-aging, but, they're carrying a $500 purse and they're spending at least, $500 a month on beauty, Botox and whatever, and they're driving a $100,000 plus car. They have their priorities totally off, totally off. So I think that that's where we need to change the mindset. Like sometimes you do have to pay for your own test. Sometimes you need to take a supplement or something to support a specific thing going on before you have 20 chronic disease labels, right? It's hard at stage 4 to get reversal. It's not impossible, but it's much harder than tackling it at a stage 1 or stage 2 of fatty liver or kidney disease or, whatever we're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. You could almost add that to number 3, right? To what people get wrong. Gwen, how can people contact you?
Okay. So they can go to my website, which is gwenfosternd.com. They can, I have a Rumble channel and YouTube, but with my name, with lots of educational videos, including interviews with you. And also they can send an email, Gwen, my name, Gwen, at gfia.net. And we'll respond with my website, but gwenfosternd.com is how people can schedule an appointment. It's where I sell health products. And either the YouTube or Rumble channel, I did some really great webinars last year that are about an hour to 2 on like cardiovascular health, vaccines, metabolic, weight loss, hormones, Hashimoto's. They're all on there. And they're like go into great detail on these subjects that a lot of people are concerned about, like all the time, common ailments.
Excellent. And what in the near future are you excited about?
Well, I'll go back to RFK. I'm super excited about a new health administration that I think might be the first time since I've been in this profession, which has been over 20 years now, that, there might actually be real change in a positive way. I have a lot of issues with the AMA and the FDA and the CDC and things like that. And I'm really hopeful. I would say I've never been hopeful. It's always been kind of the same song and dance. I don't know if you heard this, and it's just short, but on the day of the election, RFK was interviewed. A lot of people didn't hear this interview, but he was asked about fluoride because he was questioning fluoride being in the water, which in natural health, fluoride is considered bad.
Yep.
And his answer was really amazing. His answer was, not only does he not believe in fluoride, he believes it lowers IQ, dumbs people down, that fluoride was not what the original studies were on. It was on fluorine, which is not fluoride. Fluoride is industrial waste. But he said something really amazing that only my mentor, Hannah Kroger, said in the 70s. He said it also, fluoride blocks and impedes your spiritual awareness and spiritual development. And I was like, whoa, I almost dropped the phone. I was like, because I was watching on on my phone, and I was like, how does he know that? Whose ear does he have that he can make a statement about spiritual awareness having to do with fluoride? I mean, this is not a normal politician, normal environmental lawyer. He knows people, because that's not anything I've ever heard from anyone in all these years except Hannah Kroger. So for him to say that, I thought, he's an enlightened person, in more ways than I knew. I knew I liked him from his stance against chemicals and environmental issues, but I really didn't realize the depth that he might have with things that are in my lane.
Things that are non-traditional. Yeah. And I can share, we've actually sent him our formula on 3 separate occasions. I do not have word that he's taking it, but we have actually shipped it to him. So that's really exciting. All right. You can find Gwen at gwenfosternd.com. That's N as nutrition, D.com. And then you can also send her an email, gwen@gfia.net. Gwen, thank you so much for joining. Anything else before we say goodbye?
I'm good.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Chris.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. Make sure to subscribe and follow. Also, make sure not to be that guy, the guy sharing this podcast with people who are not interested in living beyond the norms. If you would like to learn more about the ESS60 molecule, the molecule responsible for the single longest longevity experimental result on mammals in history, a full 90% extension of life, visit myvitalc.com. That's myvitalc as in carbon.com.